Elena Marchetti stood in the doorway of what had once been her life's work, watching strangers cart away the last of her paintings. The Marchetti Gallery had been her sanctuary for 12 years, a converted warehouse in Phoenix's arts district, where she'd discovered emerging talents and turned blank walls into windows to other worlds. Now those same walls stared back at her, naked and accusing. "Ma'am, we need you to sign here," the repo man said, thrusting a clipboard toward her with the indifference of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Elena's hands trembled as she scrawled her name, each letter feeling like a small death. 6 months ago, she'd been planning the gallery's biggest exhibition ever. Her business partner, Janet, had been so excited about the new investors, the expanded space, the future they were building together. Elena should have known something was wrong when Janet started handling all the finances alone, claiming she wanted to free Elena up for the creative work. Elena almost laughed, but the sound would have come out broken. What? Good was creativity when everything you'd built was stolen from under you? Janet had forged Elena's signature on loan documents, emptied their business accounts, and disappeared to Costa Rica with her new boyfriend and Elena's entire life savings. The investors were fictional. The expansion was a lie. Everything had been an elaborate setup to drain every penny from the gallery and Elena's personal accounts. "Your son called again." Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. "The Hendersons are pushing for full custody. We need to discuss your living situation." Her living situation. Elena closed her eyes and tried not to think about the storage unit that now held everything she owned, or the friend's couch she'd been crashing on, until that friend started dropping hints about needing her space back. Most of all, she tried not to think about 16-year-old Tommy, her beautiful, angry son who barely spoke to her anymore. Tommy lived with his father, now her ex-husband Richard, who'd remarried a woman named Patricia with a perfect house in Scottsdale and perfect opinions about Elena's lifestyle choices. When Elena lost the gallery and couldn't pay rent on their apartment, Richard had swooped in like a vulture, filing for emergency custody and claiming Elena was financially unstable and emotionally unfit. The worst part was that Tommy seemed relieved. At his father's house, he had his own room, a gaming setup, and a stepmother who remembered to pack his lunches and drive him to soccer practice. Elena had given him art supplies and museums, late-night conversations about beauty and meaning, spontaneous road trips to discover hidden galleries in small towns. But apparently, that wasn't enough when measured against the stability and suburban comfort. "I don't understand why you can't just get a normal job," Tommy had said during their last awkward coffee meeting, his words cutting deeper than he probably intended. "Dad says you're too proud to do regular Rick, that you think you're above it, too proud." Elena walked through the empty gallery one last time, her footsteps echoing off bare concrete. She wasn't proud anymore. She was scared, lonely, and running out of options. The art world that had once embraced her now whispered about her poor judgment and lack of business sense. Former clients avoided her calls. Other gallery owners looked through her like she was invisible. At 38, Elena felt ancient and naive at the same time. She'd believed in beauty, in the power of art to transform lives, in the goodness of people like Janet. She'd trusted completely and loved deeply. And now she was paying the price for both. The repo man handed her a copy of the paperwork and left her standing in the empty space. Outside, Phoenix's winter sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting geometric patterns on the floor where her paintings used to hang. Elena sat down in the center of the empty room and finally let herself cry for the gallery, for her son, for the woman she used to be who believed tomorrow would always be better than today. She had nowhere to go and no idea what came next. Marcus Webb wiped sawdust from his hands and checked his watch. 5:30 time to pick up his daughter Lily from after-school care and head to the shelter. Every Tuesday evening for the past year, he'd volunteered at Haven House, serving dinner to anyone who needed a meal. It wasn't much, but after losing his wife in a car accident 2 years ago, Marcus had learned that helping others was sometimes the only way to quiet the grief that lived in his chest like a second heartbeat. "Daddy, can we get ice cream after?" "The shelter?" 7-year-old Lily asked as they drove through downtown Phoenix, her gap-toothed smile visible in the rearview mirror. "We'll see, sweetheart. Depends on how tired you are after helping serve dinner." Lily loved coming to the shelter. She was too young to understand the heavy stories that brought people there, seeing only potential friends and interesting conversations. Marcus envied her innocence while trying to protect it. Haven House buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, volunteers setting up tables, kitchen staff ladling beef stew into industrial-sized pots, residents gathering in the common area. Marcus had just finished arranging chairs when he noticed her. She sat alone at a corner table, perfectly still, staring at a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. Everything about her seemed careful, the way she held her shoulders, the way her hands rested precisely on the table, the way she'd positioned herself to see the entire room while remaining as invisible as possible. Most of the shelter's regulars carried their stories in visible ways: worn clothes, weathered faces, the casual camaraderie of people who'd learned to find family among strangers. But this woman looked like she was still in shock, like she couldn't quite believe where she'd ended up. "New face," said Beth, the shelter coordinator, following his gaze. "Elena something. Been coming in for about a week, but she hardly talks to anyone. Real quiet, different from our usual crowd." Marcus understood different. After Rachel died, he'd felt like an alien trying to navigate a world that no longer made sense. Well-meaning friends would invite him to barbecues and game nights, but he'd sit there feeling like he was watching life through bulletproof glass, able to see everything but unable to touch or be touched by any of it. "Daddy, why is that lady so sad?" Lily whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Marcus looked down at his daughter, then back at Elena. "I don't know, baby, but sometimes people need a friend." As they served dinner, Marcus watched Elena from the corner of his eye. She accepted her plate with a quiet thank you, but barely touched the food. When other residents tried to include her in conversations, she'd nod politely, but never offered anything in return. She reminded him of a bird with a broken wing, still beautiful, but afraid to trust that she might fly again. Near the end of the evening, disaster struck. Lily, excited about helping, knocked over a water pitcher while clearing tables. The water spread quickly across Elena's table, soaking into her jacket and the small notebook she'd been writing in. "Oh no," Lily cried, her face crumpling with embarrassment. Elena immediately started trying to save her notebook, but the pages were already soaked. For just a moment, her careful composure cracked, and Marcus saw raw devastation flash across her face, the look of someone for whom this small accident felt like the final straw. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said, rushing over with paper towels. "Lily, come apologize to the nice lady." But instead of being angry, Elena knelt down to Lily's eye level. "It's okay, sweetheart. Accidents happen to everyone." Her voice was gentle, with just a hint of something that might have been a teacher or a mother. "But I ruined your book." Lily sniffled. Elena managed a small smile, the first one Marcus had seen from her. "The words were just practice anyway. The important stuff is up here," she said, tapping her temple dot as they helped clean up. Marcus noticed Elena's hands. They were artist's hands-long fingers, stained with what might have been paint or charcoal, calloused in places that suggested years of creative work. There was a story there, and Marcus found himself wanting to know it. "Can I buy you coffee sometime?" he found himself asking as the evening wound down. To make up for my daughter's water pitcher incident. Elena looked surprised, then wary. You don't need to do that. I know I don't need to, but I'd like to. There's a quiet place called Moonrise Cafe a few blocks from here. Good coffee, comfortable chairs, no expectations. For a long moment, Elena studied his face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Marcus waited, recognizing the careful calculation of someone who learned that trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Thursday afternoon? She finally said. 2 o'clock? Thursday at 2, Marcus confirmed, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been tight for months. As Elena gathered her things and left, Lily tugged on his hand. Daddy, I think that lady needs more than coffee. Marcus squeezed his daughter's hand, thinking about broken wings and second chances. You might be right, baby. You might be right. Rosalie Chun had been running Mercy's kitchen for 15 years, ever since her husband died and left her with too much house, too much time, and a pension that stretched further when shared with others. At 67, she'd learned that the best way to honor a life well lived was to make sure other people got the chance to live theirs with dignity. The small community kitchen operated out of the basement of St. Andrew's Methodist Church, serving lunch to anyone who walked through. The doors, no questions, no sermons, no judgment. Just good food and better company. Rose had noticed Elena the moment she started coming in 3 weeks ago. The woman had formerly successful, written in every careful gesture, every precisely chosen word. Rose had seen plenty of people from all walks of life pass through her kitchen, but Elena carried herself like someone who was still surprised to find herself there. She sits at table 4 every day, Rose mentioned to her volunteer coordinator, Paul. Same spot, same time. Orders the soup but never finishes it. Always says thank you like she's apologizing for existing. Rose had a talent for reading people's hungers, not just for food, but for connection, purpose, hope. Elena was starving for all three, but too proud or too scared to ask for any of them. Thursday afternoon, Rose was surprised to see Elena arrive. With company, a tall man with kind eyes and a little girl, who immediately started examining the kitchen's collection of mismatched chairs, like each one might hold a secret. Rose, I'd like you to meet Marcus and Lily, Elena said. And Rose caught the subtle way Elena's shoulders relaxed when she said their names, like speaking them was a small gift to herself. Any friend of Elena's is family here, Rose said, meaning it. Lily, would you like to help me arrange flowers for the tables? I could use an expert opinion. While Lily busied herself with the flower arrangement, Rose watched Marcus and Elena settle into conversation. There was something tentative but genuine between them, like two people carefully building a bridge neither wanted to break. Elena tells me you used to run an art gallery, Marcus was saying. Elena's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Used to being the key phrase. Rose had heard enough stories to recognize the shape of this one betrayal loss, the particular shame that came with trusting the wrong person. She'd also learned that sometimes people needed to tell their stories in pieces, to save people when they were ready. I lost a business once, Rose said casually, setting down cups of coffee. Back in the 80s. Partner ran off with the register, and my best friend left me with debts I didn't even know existed, and a reputation that took years to rebuild. Elena looked up sharply. What did you do? Cried for about a month. Then got angry for another month. Then decided I wasn't going to let someone else's poor character define the rest of my story. Rose settled into the 4th chair at their table. Took me 3 years to pay off those debts, working jobs I was way overqualified for. But I learned something important during those years. What's that? Marcus asked. That rock bottom is actually a pretty solid foundation to build on, once you stop trying to pretend you're not there. Elena was quiet for a long moment, absently, stirring her coffee. I had a son, she said finally. Have a son. But he lives with his father now, because I can't provide stability. She said the word like it tasted bitter. How old? Rose asked. 16. His name is Tommy. He used to love coming to the gallery, would spend hours sketching the paintings. But now he looks at me like I'm this cautionary tale his stepmother warns him about. Rose nodded. She'd raised 3 children of her own, plus countless neighborhood kids who'd needed a safe place to land. 16-year-olds are experts at breaking your heart while they figure out how to heal their own. Doesn't mean they stop loving you. Just means they're scared and don't know how to show it. Mrs. Rose, Lily interrupted, holding up a small bouquet. Of daisies? Is this pretty enough for the sad lady's table? Which sad lady? Rose asked gently. Lily pointed directly at Elena. That one. She has the same face my daddy had before he started smiling again. The adults fell silent. Rose watched Elena's careful composure crack, just slightly, saw her eyes fill with tears she wouldn't let fall. You know what, Lily? Rose said. I think those flowers are perfect. And I think Elena might like to help us make some more arrangements. She has artist hands. See how graceful her fingers are? For the next hour, they worked together arranging flowers, the conversation flowing easier around the simple task. Elena's hands seemed to remember joy as she shaped the bouquets, and Rose caught glimpses of who this woman had been before life knocked her down. As they prepared to leave, Elena lingered. Rose, can I ask you something? Anything, dear. How? Do you keep believing that things can get better? When everything you trusted turns out to be a lie? Rose thought about her husband's laugh, about the children who'd found their way to her kitchen over the years, about second chances and third ones, and the stubborn persistence of hope. Because, sweetheart, the alternative is giving up on tomorrow, before you even know what it might bring. And in my experience, tomorrow has a way of surprising you, if you stick around long enough to meet it. Diego Santos understood the weight of carrying other people's pain because he'd spent most of his 28 years learning to carry his own. As a social worker at Phoenix Family Services, he specialized in cases that other workers found too complex, too messy, too heartbreaking. Maybe it was because he'd grown up in the system himself 7 foster homes, between ages 8 and 18, or maybe it was because he recognized the look in his client's eyes, the expression of someone who'd learned that the people supposed to protect you could be the ones who hurt you most. Elena Marchetti's case had landed on his desk on a gray February morning, referred by Rose Chun, who'd called the office asking if anyone could help a good woman who's lost her way back to her. Son, her ex-husband is using her homelessness against her, Rose had explained. Says she's unfit because she can't provide a stable home. But Diego, this woman isn't broken. She's just been beaten down by circumstances. Her boy needs his mother. Diego had seen enough custody cases to know that family court could be brutal, especially to parents whose only crime was being poor. But when Elena walked into his office that Thursday afternoon, he saw something that gave him hope. She was fighting. Scared, exhausted, barely holding together, but fighting. I know how this looks, Elena said before he'd even introduced himself, gesturing at her thrift store clothes and worn sneakers. I know what you probably think about mothers who lose their children. I think, Diego said carefully, that you're here because you love your son and want him back. That's a good place to start. Elena's shoulders sagged slightly. His father is remarried to a woman who makes organic lunches and drives a minivan. They live in a house with a pool and a 3-car garage. Tommy has his own bathroom and a gaming setup that cost more than I used to make in a month at the gallery. And what did you give him? The question seemed to surprise her. What do? You mean? Before everything fell apart, what did you give your son that he couldn't get anywhere else? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Art, she said finally. Museums on Sunday mornings. Conversations about why Picasso painted the way he did. Road trips to find galleries in small towns. I taught him to see beauty in unexpected places. Her voice grew stronger. Tommy could sketch a face in 5 minutes that looked more real than a photograph. He understood color theory better than some adults. We'd spend hours talking about how artists throughout history had found ways to make people feel less alone. Diego made notes, but more importantly, he listened to the shift in Elena's voice. This was a mother talking about her child, not a victim talking about her losses. The court-appointed mediator said those things were frivolous, Elena continued, anger creeping into her tone. That Tommy needed practical skills and stability more than art lessons. Have you seen Tommy recently? Coffee twice a month, supervised by his stepmother. He barely talks to me. Last time, he spent the whole hour on his phone. Elena's hands twisted in her lap. Patricia says I'm disrupting his healing process by trying to maintain a relationship. Diego recognized the language of manipulation when he heard it. He'd lived with foster parents who'd used similar phrases to justify cutting him off from siblings, friends, anyone who might remind him of the life he'd lost. Elena, I want to be honest with you about what we're facing. Family court tends to favor stability over everything else, especially when there's a significant income difference between parents. But there are things we can do. Over the next hour, Diego outlined a plan. Elena needed stable housing, not perfect, but consistent. She needed income, even if it was modest. Most importantly, she needed to document her relationship with Tommy, to show the court that their bond was real and beneficial to him. I can't afford an apartment, Elena said. Even a studio costs more than I make from temp work. What about a room rental? Rose mentioned she knows people in the community who might be willing to help. It's not permanent, but it's a step. And work? Tell me about your skills, besides gallery management. Elena thought. I taught art classes sometimes. Private lessons. For adults who wanted to learn painting or drawing. I know about art history, restoration techniques, color theory. The community college has been looking for part-time instructors. It doesn't pay much, but it's regular income, and it's respectable work. References? My old clients blacklisted me after the scandal with Janet. They think I was involved in the embezzlement. Diego had seen this before, how one person's betrayal could destroy an innocent person's entire network. What about people who knew you personally? Friends, neighbors, other parents from Tommy's school? I don't know. After everything happened, I was so ashamed. I stopped returning calls, stopped going places where I might run into people I knew. Shame is a luxury you can't afford right now, Diego said gently. Your son needs you to be brave enough to ask for help. As their session wound down, Diego felt the familiar mixture of hope and concern that came with cases like this. Elena had resources she didn't know she possessed: intelligence, creativity, love for her child. But she also had to overcome a system designed to keep families separated once they'd been broken apart. Diego, Elena said as she gathered her things, can I ask you something personal? He nodded. You seem very young to understand so much about family loss. How do you know what it feels like to be separated from people you love? Diego thought about all the caseworkers who'd passed through his childhood, the ones who'd treated him like a file number, and the few who'd seen him as a person worth saving. Because I was Tommy once, he said simply. A kid caught between adults who couldn't figure out how to put his needs first. The difference is, Tommy has a mother who's willing to fight for him. That counts for more than you know. As Elena left his office, Diego began making calls. Rose was right. This was a good woman who'd lost her way back to her son. But Diego had learned that sometimes the way back wasn't a straight line. Sometimes it was built one small victory at a time by people who believed that family was worth fighting for. 6 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of her small apartment above Moonrise Cafe. Watching Tommy arrange his art supplies on the desk, Marcus had helped her build from reclaimed wood. The space wasn't much one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living area that doubled as her art studio, but it was hers, and for the first time in over a year, she had a key to her own front door. "Mom, where should I put the charcoals?" Tommy asked, holding up a box of drawing supplies that Diego had helped her buy with her first paycheck from the community college. "Wherever feels right to you," Elena said, still marveling at the sound of him calling her mom again instead of Elena, which he'd done during those awful supervised visits with Patricia hovering nearby. The road back to this moment had been built by small acts of courage and the stubborn kindness of people who'd chosen to see her as worth saving. Rose had connected her with Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who'd needed someone trustworthy to live in her converted garage apartment in exchange for light housekeeping and companionship. The arrangement had given Elena an address, a sense of purpose, and 8 months to rebuild her life piece by piece. Diego had fought for her in family court, documenting every art lesson she'd given to neighborhood kids, every volunteer hour at Rose's kitchen, every small step toward stability. When the judge finally agreed to joint custody, Elena had cried right there in the courtroom, not from relief, but from gratitude for people who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Marcus had become something she'd never expected to find again, a partner who understood that love wasn't about rescuing someone, but about standing beside them while they rescued themselves. He'd taught her that it was possible to build something new without pretending the broken parts had never existed. "Elena, are you okay?" Tommy asked, and she realized she'd been standing in the doorway for several minutes, lost in thought. "More than okay," she said, settling beside him at the desk. "I'm grateful." Tommy had grown 3 inches and gained a new depth in his brown eyes during their time apart. The angry, confused boy who'd blamed her for disrupting his comfortable life had been replaced by a young man who understood that sometimes families had to break apart before they could heal properly. "I'm sorry I was such a jerk," he'd told her during one of their first unsupervised visits. "Patricia kept saying you were irresponsible and that Dad was protecting me from your chaos. But I missed the chaos. I missed our museum trips and staying up late talking about art. I missed you teaching me how to really see things." Now, on this Sunday evening, their small apartment was full of the people who'd become their chosen family. Rose sat at the kitchen table with Lily, both of them working on a jigsaw puzzle while Marcus cooked dinner and Diego told stories about his latest cases, with names changed to protect privacy, of course. "Mom, look at this," Tommy said, showing her a sketch he'd been working on. It was a portrait of all of them, Elena, Marcus, Lily, Rose, and Diego gathered around Rose's kitchen table at Mercy's kitchen. But he'd drawn them not as they appeared on any single day, but as the family they'd become. Rose with her wise, gentle hands, Marcus with Lily on his shoulders, Diego with his arms crossed but smiling, Elena in the center, no longer trying to disappear, but finally taking up the space she deserved. "It's beautiful," Elena said, meaning it. "What are you going to call it?" Tommy thought for a moment. "Home," he said simply. "It's called Home." As they gathered around the small table for dinner, Elena looked at each face in the warm light of her tiny apartment. A year ago, she'd been sleeping in her car, convinced that her life was over at 43. She'd lost everything she thought defined her business, her house, her financial security, her reputation. But she'd gained something she'd never known she was missing. A family built not on blood or obligation, but on the radical choice to show up for each other, especially when showing up was hard. "What should we toast to?" Marcus asked, raising his glass of sparkling cider. "Second chances," Rose suggested. "Chosen family," Diego added. "Art supplies," Lily said seriously, making everyone laugh. To finding home in unexpected places. Elena said, looking around the table at the people who taught her that sometimes losing everything you thought you needed was the only way to discover what you actually couldn't live without. Tommy raised his glass highest. To Mom, who taught me that broken things can become beautiful if you're willing to put in the work to fix them. As they clinked glasses, Elena felt something she'd thought was lost forever, the quiet certainty that tomorrow would be worth waking up for. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer facing it alone. Outside, Phoenix's winter sunset painted the sky in shades of hope, and inside Elena's small apartment, a family that had found each other in the darkest places, settled in for an evening of laughter, stories, and the simple miracle of being seen and loved exactly as they were. Sometimes the best families are the ones you build yourself, one act of courage at a time.